This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Hey, it's Greg Stanley with the Collector Car Podcast. This is an episode that's all about next generation cars. And I know a little bit about that, but I'd much rather have an expert talk. So I brought on Philip Richter. Philip, how you doing today?
I'm great, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being on here because I've seen you from afar. I've read your articles in Sports Car Market, one of my favorite magazines. I've just mentioned before the call, I saw you at the Quail, but I didn't want to interrupt you and your family. So it's our first time meeting, so I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, well, earlier I listened to your podcast with Ken Gross, which was awesome. He's a legend. And I caught a tidbit there on March 1st. They're going to do a Hoods Up at that Vero Beach Museum, and I'm going to go up there and go for that. So that was a great tip. Thanks.
Oh, that's great. That means my podcast reached one person that will actually go to that. So I appreciate that.
I'm going. I'll be there.
Tell them you're there because you heard it on the Collector Car Podcast.
I will. I'll tell Ken that.
Yeah, Ken's great. Anytime you can get Ken talking about cars, you want to hit the record button, right?
It's incredible. The knowledge that guy has is just unparalleled.
Yeah. Well, I alluded to next gen cars, but if you would kind of give us an overview of your involvement in the car world. And it sounds like you got a lot of stuff going in a couple places. So yeah, just kind of give us an overall, 101.
Yeah. So, I mean, it all kind of, the genesis is passion, right? For cars. And frankly, I think even more for the people who are involved with collector cars. It's an incredible demographic that chooses to spend their time with these vehicles, chooses to restore them, to show them, to share them with people. My love of collector cars kind of goes back to I grew up on a farm outside New York City, and I always had motorcycles, mini bikes, dirt bikes. So I always loved things mechanical. I always loved tinkering with things and fixing them and breaking them and cleaning them and dirtying them and all that. And I grew up with this guy that was in my grammar school class, Malcolm Prey. And his dad owned the Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen franchise in Greenwich. And this was, I met young Malcolm in 1975, 76 when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. And he and I were best friends. And on play dates, I'd go over to Malcolm's house on Round Hill Road. And his dad had these garages just full of cars. I mean 300 SL Gullwings and, Porsche Spiders and all these just crazy cars. And being 5, 6, 7 years old, it was just a candy store. And so that kind of got my passion going in cars. And then sadly, young Malcolm, my friend, died in an automobile accident when he was 16. And big Malcolm and I became really close. And I sort of became his stand-in son, if you will. And we did a lot of things together, went to a lot of shows together, and just had a lot of fun together with the cars. And then I started my collecting habit, and I built a garage on our family farm up in Westchester County, New York. And I've been really collecting pre-war vintage BMW motorcycles from the 30s, which was my dad grew up in that period of Germany, a very, very ugly moment in history with some very beautiful motorcycles that were one of the only positive things to come out of that decade in Germany. But right. And then modern classics, so cars that I grew up with, kind of in the 80s and 90s, that I just always wanted, whether the quintessential kind of modern classic young timer car for me is a Mercedes 500e, right? The Porsche built collaboration sedan with the flared fenders and all of that, and cars like that appeal to me because of my age and my demographic, but also because they're drivable even today on a modern highway. You can drive a 500e and do anything a modern car would do. But it's different. It's something that took 18 days to build and handmade and pushed around on dollies in the Porsche factory. So cars that are bespoke, cars that have a manufacturing process that's different or interesting, like the Audi R8, they're all built at Quattro GmbH, a whole separate building, and they're pretty much hand-built cars, beautifully made instruments. So cars like that have something special behind them that are, in that modern classic category. I recently dove into the pre-war world, and I bought a 1933 Packard 12 which has just been such a fun thing to be involved with, and going to shows with a car like that and driving a car like that. They're engineering masterpieces, and those cars will be around forever. I mean, the car's almost 100 years old. It drives like it's new, stops,
Right.
starts, just runs. You have to be careful when you're starting it because you can't hear the motor running.
Right.
It's like, it sounds like a Tesla when it's idling. So it's fun. Met so many great people in the car world. I started my garage, Turtle Garage. The nickname comes from an oil and gas project I invested in southern Louisiana that was in the Turtle Bayou field. And by dumb luck, it was a success, and it enabled me to start collecting cars and building my garage. So I've named the Turtle Garage after the Turtle Bayou discovery that we had in southern Louisiana, mostly natural gas well. And then I started writing a blog, and turtlegarage.com. And from that spread a relationship with Keith Martin at Sports Car Market, who was reading my blog and then asked me to write for Sports Car Market. And that's just been an absolute, what's a great publication, great people, great staff, and very organic. The magazine is really it's really a public good in the sense, I mean, Keith may own the magazine, but the contributors and the participants in the collector car world really own the magazine. I mean, you get people, like Miles Collier writing incredible articles about cars, or Ken Gross, or all these luminaries who
Right here.
Yeah, there you go, Sports Car Market. And I don't think there's anything like that in the market. And there's been a lot of magazines that have tried to, displace them or do something like them, and it's not the same. And so that's been really fun. And I've recently gotten involved with the Revs Institute in Naples, Florida. Miles Collier's fantastic collection. You can't even really call it a collection. It's a shrine. It's the most beautiful place to go if you're into historic vehicles and their history. So I'm working with them on. They've created a small advisory board, and I've been put onto that to help with some things they're working on there, some initiatives. So it's been really fun. And I do a couple panels for Sports Car Market. I spoke last year at Pebble Beach on the panel with Randy Nonnenberg from Bring a Trailer, and we talked about all the things that are going on in that universe with the changes in the way people are buying cars, looking at cars, commenting on cars, vetting cars, all of it. So it's a great world, and I really enjoy the people. It's really fun.
Yeah, no, that's really great, and I appreciate you being on this podcast. And as you dive into this world of cars, it sounds like you're kind of going in two different directions. You're going to the pre-war,
yep,
but then also, in the next gen stuff. So if you would, let's kind of talk about next gen a little bit. I do have some cars. I'll save it to the end that I want to ask about that aren't next gen cars on people's radars. It's more for me in my high school. I'm curious about your thought on them. But why don't you kind of give us an overview of your thoughts on the next gen and what they're driving from a collector car marketplace, some of the valuation trends you're seeing out there?
Well, I think the valuations are shocking, and from my position, so my day job is I'm an investment manager, and my firm that I co-founded, is called Hollowbrook Wealth Management, and we manage capital for families, foundations, endowments, and we look very carefully all the time at valuation, like who wants to pay too much for something, particularly in the world of stocks and bonds and risk assets. Whenever you overpay, you really ultimately get burned, and we work really hard not to overpay for things. The collector car world is just become a mania. If you look at what's happened in some of the pricing dynamics of some cars, most cars actually, the charts are just up and to the right. It's stratospheric what's happened, and it's not just one kind of type of car. You're seeing Honda Civic SIs selling for $75,000 on Bring a Trailer that have 4,000 original miles. But I think you got to ask yourself the bigger question, like what's really going on here? In our world of investing, you would say, well, we've had a decade of free money. The Federal Reserve has kept interest rates well below the level of economic growth. We've printed tons of money. We created over $10 trillion during COVID. Andy Warhol paintings that were once $400,000 are now 40 million, 50 million, 60 million. So there's asset price inflation everywhere because of this central bank experiment that then went around the world. Then the European Central Bank did the same thing. The Japanese Central Bank, the Chinese central banks, they all printed money. You could say it's a race to the bottom in some senses. But what's really, really interesting in the car world is that you have this just powerful force of demographics. You have people like me who had a 500e over their, bedroom wall in college, or the classic quintessential Countach poster in your dorm room. Call it what you want. This is very much emotional buying, and now it's global. Between demographics and technological innovation, and really, I think what this comes down to, it's not so much the internet that's changed the car business. It's the ability of ubiquitous networks. So high-speed internet on your phone, smartphone. Not a lot of people, I think, go to bringatrailer.com. I think they're all on their phone, even though they don't have an app yet. But it's interesting that this network effect of being able to, always have your phone on and be connected to data sources, that wasn't so good 20 years ago, right?
Right.
And so the dot-com bust had to blow up, and we had all this dark fiber around the world that now is finally lit up, and we're getting the benefit of that in the collector car world because it's 24/7, always on, always available from any device. And so demographics and these 24/7 very innovative sites, it's a big change in the industry, and I think you have to rethink your view of what's a car worth when so many eyeballs can see it, and there's passion here, which is very different than the investing world, where it's one thing to be passionate about pharmaceuticals and industrial stocks, but it's another thing to just overpay to buy Pfizer. People don't want to do that, but that same investor will overpay for that Porsche 944 Turbo that they couldn't afford back in 1987, and now they want that car. And so that's what's going on here. And the youngtimer thing, or the next gen cars, I think really the real focal point here, and the interesting thing to talk about, is what's going on in the JDM market, or even just Japanese cars in general. The day I saw on Bring a Trailer a couple of years ago that a Supra sold for six figures, I just was like, oh my God. These are cars that, yes, I mean, the Supra was a badass car when it came out. A friend of mine had one new, big wing. I mean, the thing was just a powerhouse, but it was a Supra, right? It's a Toyota. Now, that car, there's a lot of people who want to own that car, and there's not a lot of them left. It's the old story, right? Like the E30 M3 is another poster child of that type of car. I have one right here on the lift here, and they're amazing to drive. They're analog cars. They're just drop dead gorgeous with the flares, but they were used up. Like, those cars were meant to be driven. They were raced. They put roll cages in them. People drove them. And the ones that got sold here in the States for the homologation rules, they ended up in like Darien, Connecticut, in parking lots, baking in the hot sun while the owner went to the city to work and came back at night, right? So find a like 15,000 mile E30 M3 or a 9,000 mile Supra that's been lovingly cared for. Kind of good luck, even though they made a lot of them.
Right.
So the production stats, Ferrari, it's always important. 959, Porsche is like such a low production rate. But some of these higher volume production cars that are special, there's just not that many left. Period. Yeah. And I guess there are, but they're not investment grade. Find a 10,000 mile 500e. It's unobtainium. They're all too fun to drive. It's like saving your wife for her next husband. Like, people aren't gonna, not drive a 500e. Right. Yeah. The Japanese market is, I think, a really great example of this phenomenon of modern classics, of youngtimer cars, whatever you want to label these cars from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There's just a great, powerful demographic that now has cash to spend.
Right. Yeah, no, it's really cool. A couple of things you said there. Obviously, the internet, the speed of the internet as such, and the global aspect financially. Because what I've seen, at least in the live auctions as well, is you've got those internet bidders that are just as active in the room, so to speak, as as anyone else is. So it's really nuts. And then also it's from a global perspective, so they're getting up at the time to make sure that they do, at least at at the live auctions, to catch them when they're crossing the block. So that is really cool.
I recently, there's some interesting dynamics too about like online bidding, and I recently just bought an Audi R8 on Bring a Trailer, and it was Thursday. It was a Thursday afternoon auction, and it was during Calvalino and during Scottsdale, and there just wasn't a lively, there wasn't a ton of bidders out there, and so you can buy things from time to time where there's market failures, right? Where there's just not that other three people in the room. They're busy. They weren't around. They're at a car show, or they're at Calvalino, wherever they are. And so sometimes you can get a good deal, even with the commissions and shipping and everything.
All right, Philip. Well, you've talked about a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool cars. I do want to talk about some specific ones to get your insight on it, because I think your insight will be very, very interesting. So what's cool is we're actually before Amelia Island. So I want you to kind of maybe guess. If you guess where these cars land in the estimate range, that'd be cool. If not, that's fine. But just kind of your thoughts on some of these, what I qualify as next-gen cars. Now, some of them are a little bit different. I guess you would say the very first one, I don't know, you would call it a next-gen car, would you? I mean, it's from the era, but it's definitely an exotic supercar, the 1991 Jaguar XJR 15.
Yeah, that falls into the more of the kind of
hyper.
Yeah. I mean, but back then there wasn't even really a term supercar, but these are ultra rare, prototype type supercars. I mean, that's an incredible piece. Yeah.
Now, would you put this in? Are you seeing the next generation buying this, or is it more of the old guard buying it?
I mean, I think these are a collector who's buying a car like this is someone who probably already owns, several super rare Jaguars, probably a very sophisticated investor, collector, wants that slot in their collection, because this is unobtainium. I mean, I don't know when the last time one of these has come up in an auction ever.
Yeah, there's only 27 built.
Yeah,
so yeah.
So, this is definitely a big boy car, and I think you've got to have a real passion for Jaguar, British heritage, etc. These are just halo supercars. Incredible! What a piece! Wow.
Yeah. Yep. All right. My next one here. This one's pretty cool. Ford GTs. They've been all over the board. I mean, they went kind of nuts. The Heritage went up to 800, 850. So of course the quote unquote base Ford GTs had to follow suit. What are your thoughts on the Ford GTs from a next gen perspective?
I love these cars. I think this is just such a fantastic thing that Ford did. Amazing that they were able to get this out of the boardroom and onto the road. A friend of mine has one. He drove it all over Europe, and now it's in his living room. These are fantastic cars to drive. I've never driven one myself. I've driven in one. And then obviously the follow-up, where they even just took it to a whole nother level with the new GT. But I think I think this is a one-way train for these cars. They didn't build a ton of them, and they're great driving cars. And so put that all together, it's actually a pretty reliable car from what I've gathered from owners. These are going to continue to be in demand.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, do you think they've peaked? Like the estimate on this one's 500 to 600. Do you think that's dead on? What are your thoughts? Or
I kind of think everything here is not just for GTs, but I think the market in general is very, very full, very full.
Yes. Okay.
And I think cars like this definitely become victim if and when we have a downturn or lower, demand activity. But look at this. I mean, then they come out with this, which is just, what a statement about the American automobile industry and where we are, and that we're not dead. We're very, very much alive. These halo cars are just spectacular. If you've ever seen one of these in person, this is a classic example of a car that really needs to be seen to be believed. The pictures just don't do it any justice. You have to see these in person, and they're beautifully built. A lot of carbon fibers you can see, and just a stunning car. But yeah, I think these are, I think all of these things are very full. Very full.
Okay. Yep.
It wouldn't surprise me to see Ford GTs trading down, a year or two from now, at least that generation, not the prior generation to this. But, these are, in the long run, they'll be great cars to own. And you enjoy a car like this. This is a car. I don't think people should, in general, I don't recommend buying cars as investments. I think you buy cars for passion. And if you have good taste and you buy the right thing, you're going to do very well financially anyways. But that's not why you're buying these assets.
Right.
Unless you're a dealer, of course. That's a different topic.
Yeah. And this is the 2020 Ford GT Carbon Series we're talking about. And I've always loved the rear flying buttress on these things. It's just unbelievable the way they designed it. Yeah.
I would put this car up against anything built by anybody. McLaren, Porsche, anybody. Lamborghini. This car is badass.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's incredible for sure. This next one I'm kind of curious about. It's a Dodge Viper. Give me your thoughts on that as a next gen car, much more attainable. This is the crazy version. This is a 17 ACR Voodoo 2 edition, one of the very last ones. But just Dodge Vipers in general, the first gen that were at 30 grand forever, now they're at 80 grand. Just give me your thoughts.
I personally think the first gen Viper, I mean, this is obviously a great car, don't get me wrong, but I don't want to drive a car around with a 30-foot wing on it. It makes a pretty big statement. I think the original Viper, as envisioned by Bob Lutz and created by Bob Lutz and his team, it just shows, again, American innovation. They took the parts bin from what they could get. They worked at night. These guys pushed this through the sausage grinder of Chrysler at the time, which was not an easy grinder. And they made it happen, and they built these cars, which really was a modern Cobra. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a Cobra, the roofless version, and they did it. And I think those cars have been undervalued forever. I mean, you're right, they were 30 grand all day long. You couldn't, even ones with no mileage in the wrapper, and now, I mean, they're moving for sure, and they should move. They're raw. This one, the later gens are, you actually have a glove box and you have
right
stuff, but where the original cars were really, really raw.
Yeah.
And I think really attractive, really good looking cars. I mean, beautifully designed car. I think all of these Vipers are going to be important cars going forward. But if my money were on, I'd buy a 92. I'd buy an early production car, even though those weren't as good as the later production cars from a quality control standpoint. I think as a historic product out of Chrysler in that era to build this car.
Yeah,
I think about it. They were building, the Dodge Acclaim and the Dynasty,
the Shadow
cars and the Shadow, and I mean, God, and this thing comes along, so it's cool.
Yeah, it's funny. I would love to have a 96 that it's traditional blue GTS with the white stripes, chrome wheels. I take that all day long.
Yep.
All right, give me your thoughts on the SLSs. This is the Black Series we have in the auction, which is super special. Yep. Estimates like $800 to $1 million. Just the SLSs overall, where do you see those in the future of car collecting?
It's funny. Obviously, they're awesome cars. I mean, just let's talk about the base SLS, right? You can get them in alubeam silver metallic with the special color order and AMG special colors. Like they're cool, and the gull-wing doors obviously harken back to the great 55 gull-wing. This car in particular, though, and I'm talking my own book because I own an SL65 Black Series.
Okay.
And this car just, to me, has just too much going on. It's too bombastic. It's just a lot to look at, whereas the SL65 Black Series just is a sleek, slick, wide body V12 bi-turbo machine. But look, these are this is any Black Series is an amazing car, and no one's gonna ever say that this is not a great car. The Black Series, I mean, talk about taking an already ludicrous car and then making it even more crazy. That's what Black Series is all about, and this is obviously a pristine example. But I do think these shot up for a while and they came back in, and now they appear to be on the move again. I think the market's starting to understand that these Black Series cars really are different. I mean, if you look at this car relative to a normal SLS, I mean, the bodywork is actually completely different. The stance, interior appointments, all of it, even like the quality of the leather of the Black Series cars is generally better. I mean, the leather in the SL65 is a whole different level than a pedestrian SL65. And these are all, again, most of them all built at Falterbach. They're not built at Mercedes. They're all built at AMG now. I think that any Black Series car, I would love to have in my garage.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And these would be my least favorite, only because I just think it's just too much.
Too much. Right.
It's just too much. But it's a Black Series, and at the end of the day, it's special. It's special being an SLS, but it's special being a Black Series. So I like actually the plain Jane SLS. Alubeam silver, great car, and they've gone up quite a bit. They've seen a real bid.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay. I'm not going to go through all the Ferraris I pulled for you, but we can talk about that in a second. The instant classic, the Porsche 911R. Tell us about that. Where do you see that? I mean, those things just took off as soon as they were built, right?
I mean, so we had one of these. So I don't know if we talked about earlier my event that I do, my weekend. Car event, the Turtle Invitational. We do it every other year. We had one of these at the Turtle Invitational in 2019, and I mean, look at the interior, the upholstery. Like it's these are the followers of these cars are fanatical people, and they want this car. And right. My problem is with Porsches. I mean, they're building a lot of cars. They're building a lot of cars that are special. So when you talk about, rare Porsches, they're now like, oh, they only built 900 of them or whatever, the iteration is. These are rare though, and these have just their own bespoke feel, performance, following, and that car. I mean, of all the cars we had at the Turtle Invitational in 2019, we had some great vehicles. This car caused a total sensation. People went mad when it pulled in. So yeah. I think that's of the long lineage of incredible Porsches from the 55 Speedster through the 959. This car is going to be always mentioned in that list.
Right.
It has to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you see the new GT4 RS with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Another instant collectible from Porsche for sure.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
No, instant collectible for sure. And this one's obviously new in the wrapper. It's never been.
Yeah. Yeah. I did have one more Porsche. I just threw it on there because I thought, that's very interesting. This 2000 Porsche Boxer S. Now this one's no reserve. It's kind of a purple kind of color. It's got some nice little options on it. The estimate's only 20 to 30 grand. Is that way too low? Where do you think this thing would sell at?
It's cheap thrills. Like, okay, this car is not going to appreciate, but these are fun to drive. Have you driven one?
I have, yeah.
The S in particular actually is really worth the extra, having that. They're great cars. I mean, I think Porsche was trying hard. That was a tough era for Porsche. The old adage was in the old days of this era, you couldn't tell a 911 from a Boxster from the front because they were basically using the same parts because they needed to cut costs and things. But these are really fun to drive, and it's a 3-pedal car, obviously, and that's a lot of car for 20 to 30 grand.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do know we need to go before too long here, but I did want to ask you, getting back to more of the JDM aspect of the world, what are your thoughts on the R34 as it becomes, they're slowly becoming legal to bring into the US? Do you think as there's more, prices will go up, or do you think as there's more, prices will go down? Do you think it's
I think that's a car that is all about demand, and I think they could bring 100,000 of them into the United States, and I think there'd still be appetite for it, right?
Oh, wow.
Being
Okay.
facetious, but I think there's strong demand for that car and a lot of the other JDM cars that are kind of obscure, that are now becoming old enough to be imported to the U.S. And I think you're going to see a lot more of those types of cars coming in and buyers to buy them.
Any barrier to it mostly being right-hand drive and stick shift?
I don't think so. I think that just makes it quirky and unusual, and then it's truly a JDM car, right? Like right-hand drive just says it all. So I don't think so. I think this is all stuff that's not going to happen again, right?
Right.
Like we're moving towards the appliance car, right? We're all going to be driving eventually, if the regulators have what they want. We're all going to be driving oversized golf carts.
Right.
And these are things that I think the market's realizing that, like, the V12 X, Y, and Z is not going to be built anymore.
Right.
And these are beautiful, like these Ferraris that we were going to talk about, the F40 or the GTO or the F50. Even Ferrari, like they dipped their toe in with the LaFerrari, and now it's a $90,000 battery change on that car, right? A lot of these cars, like these JDM import cars, I don't think Toyota and Honda, like they're not going to be building these again, in my view.
Right.
And so it's a real case of demand exceeding supply. And then with the JDM thing, you have this rule on timing. So now they're dribbling into the United States, and there's going to be more excitement about them and more excitement and pent up demand.
So I do need to let you go because I don't want to take all your time up, but I could talk about this forever. What in your mind are desirable next gen American cars that are not, you got the Viper. I mean, the Grand National, that seems to not fall in.
Ship has sailed.
Right? Yeah.
Well,
but it's the era.
The answer to this question is the ZR1. The ZR1 Corvette is, again, I fall for these cars that have an interesting build history, right? So, GM got Lotus involved.
Yeah.
They got Mercury Marine involved, and they built this thing kind of at the end of the malaise era in the late 80s. And when that thing hit the front page of Car and Driver, I just still remember the cover, King of the Hill, all of that, the Corvette from Hell, all of that. That thing is it's such a cool car. And actually for the earlier years, I think 90, 91, and 92, the ZR1 was actually wider behind than the standard Corvette, right?
Like 4 inches, right?
And then they made all of them that way. But a 1990 Corvette ZR1, again, not the best year. I guess the 95 is really the one to own from a standpoint of like being the best performance and best build quality and all of that. But an early ZR1, an early Viper, can't throw out a Grand National for sure. They're out there too, but I think the ZR1 is the car.
Yeah. And I've seen a couple of the Camaro Firehawks lighting it up a little bit. Some of those, like you said, one-off. They only built 16 of them. That kind of stuff going on. So
yeah.
Awesome. Was there anything we didn't cover that you wanted
Greg,
to cover?
I would just, a shameless plug for the Turtle Invitational coming up
Sure.
September 23rd and 24th in Bedford, New York. You can go online to turtleinvitational.com. It's for a good cause. It's the Prey Foundation, Malcolm Prey Foundation in Connecticut, actually Bedford, New York, that does a lot of great things for underprivileged kids, teaching them about what's possible in life with entrepreneurial pursuits and what people have done in this life with nothing and built great empires and done a lot of great things for the world. So we're doing that. There's a dinner Friday night. There's a road tour Saturday. There's a barbecue at the Prey Foundation Museum Saturday night, and then the show is Sunday. And it's going to be a really great weekend of fun. We get 100 cars. It's all invite only. The cars are all curated and invited. We get 15 motorcycles, and it's going to be a good time. So.
Well, I will put all the information with links in the description to this episode so people can definitely find out more about it. And really appreciate your time on the Collector Car Podcast. I'll have to catch you on the next show field, right?
Great, Greg. We'll see you out there. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.